Having undergone many years of aggressively neoliberal-style capitalism, power has slowly slipped from the humble hands of we regular people, now held by a carefully consolidated cohort of conniving capitalists. Many well-paid and respected jobs have been shipped overseas, along with the livelihood and financial security for millions of workers worldwide. Mining jobs were replaced with positions peddling petty appliances at electronics stores. The deep well of manufacturing jobs dried up. But that's okay, you can take a barista course. Jobs carrying a distinct sense of pride and belonging are out. Roles requiring repetitive and rudimentary labor are in. The era we find ourselves in has seen work become increasingly menial and dissatisfying, with fewer opportunities for promotions, more competition amongst applicants, and all but defunct union protections. But there is something magical we get in exchange. A gift! Bestowed upon us by the good graces of dangerously unchecked capitalism. A nifty little compensation for the mere disillusion of our power, rights, and communities. We get stuff! We get to consume! We get to consume stuff! Here in the West, consumption is the primary driving force of our modern economy. We consume food from supermarkets, fast food restaurants, fancy five-star restaurants that require bookings 3 months in advance, food trucks, food stalls, vending machines. We consume technology, computers, iPod Nanos, Juul Pods, phones, adapters for phones, headphones, adapters to plug headphones into our phones, entertainment, movie theaters, Netflix, video games, operas, YouTube. Like and subscribe. Some of us base our identities around the media that we consume and will fight to the death over our held beliefs about a movie franchise. The Star Wars prequels were better than the originals. We have our favorite spots for consumption and will become angry if something doesn't meet our previously established expectations for consumption. I too am very much a consumer. I purchased this desk on which my camera, tripod, microphone, ring light, and limited edition Snoopy mug sit. I bought these chicken tendies, consuming them in a figurative sense when I made the transaction, and now I will consume it in a literal sense. This here cat was not cheap, but he's just so fluffy. Bask in his glory. I certainly did not need this Legend of Zelda Ocarina, but I sure felt like I did at the time. Anyway, here's Wonderwall. Many of us live to consume, with nearly every aspect of Western society built on the consumption of goods and services. Now, people have always been consumers to some extent. How can we not be? We need to buy food, clothing, shelter, all the necessary things to be able to participate in society. But in many respects, consumption has become our culture. Where we once had danced around maypoles, chanting and singing while on powerful hallucinogenic mushrooms, or ritually sacrificed each other. Now we gather with a few friends, buy some popcorn, and go watch the latest Fast and Furious. Frivolously yet fabulously fast, forever fatally furious 2. Where did we all go so wrong? Discussing the things we eat, the things we watch, the things we play has too become a ritual in and of itself. There's just so many gosh darn options for consumption out there. We want to be sure we're making the best consumer choices, lest we waste our hard-earned cash on a mediocre burrito bowl, or a grossly overhyped video game that fails to deliver on 90% of the promises made at E3. The only thing that makes a bad consumer choice more bearable is the thought that you got a good deal on it. You'll almost certainly regret buying those Adventure Time slippers at full price, but having climbed to the top of a vicious Black Friday crowd that just trampled 11 people to grab the last pair at 75% off? Well, now that's a bloody bargain right there. The fact that they're not very warm or comfortable and chafe your ankles is irrelevant because you made a good consumer choice, and that makes you feel good. It makes me feel good too. Now, I'm not here to make any moral pronouncements about anyone's consumption habits. Lord knows I'm well immersed in consumer culture, but I am here to pose the question to you, dear viewer. Why? Why is this what our culture has become? Why do so many of our jobs and identities revolve around consumption? Well, I have at least a partial explanation. The shift from Western economies built on manufacturing and production to that of a market driven by consumers hungry for the latest cellular communications device, or limited edition McDonald's menu item, was no accident. The 1980s marked the acceleration of this shift, as Western governments started to sell off entire manufacturing industries to predominantly poorer Asian countries. Consumer culture was on the rise following World War II, but the 1980s onward saw an explosion of excess goods now available to a worldwide market, due to more complex supply chains and the exploitation of cheap labor from the Third World. with an unfathomable number of new products available for us to consume. Many of us didn't notice the most destructive implications of this reorganization of the economy. By exporting so many of the jobs that produce essential societal goods and raw materials, the collective power of workers was greatly diminished. I'll explain what I mean by that. Wendy's! It's a place. I used to work there. It taught me a lot about the soul-crushing nature of working for an international economic machine that is a fast food chain. High expectations were placed on workers with the compensation of the minimum wage and a free value meal of Soylent sludge fresh off the conveyor belt every shift. If I quit, they're understaffed until a replacement is found. If everyone at the store quits, they might have to close up shop for a few days while they find new workers. Many people come and go, which can cause temporary disruptions to the company. But ultimately, there's always more workers to fill their place and people will find somewhere else to get shitty food. Training new employees is a relatively cheap and easy process. Or in my case, I didn't even receive training, which made for a pretty neat first shift. This is the nature of many service industry jobs. Jobs populated by people who desperately need the meager wages that these companies offer, and have no leverage with which they can bargain for better conditions. If you aren't willing to accept what they offer, someone behind you is ready and willing to pick up the name badge and slap on a fake smile. Now take a worker in a steel mill as an opposite example. They work in a highly specialized role that requires advanced and costly training over a much longer period of time than what it takes to train a burger flipping technician. They still have high expectations to adhere to, but these jobs would often come with generous salaries, benefits, and union protections. If a worker quit, it could take months to fill that position again, with understaffing causing serious disruptions to production output. If the whole factory quit, not only would the mill likely have to close indefinitely while they desperately search for new workers, but now the raw materials needed for building and maintaining vital societal infrastructure become unavailable, causing rippling effects throughout countless industries and potentially the economy at large. These workers held an enormous amount of power if they stood in solidarity against tyrannical bosses. An employee walkout or strike could force employers to address safety concerns, correct bad business practices, or raise their wages. Are you starting to see why governments decided it would be better for business if these jobs were shipped away? The slew of economic developments made, stretching back to the 70s and well into our lifetimes today, have sought to alienate us from our labor, meaning we no longer have control of what the companies we work for produce, whom they produce it for, where it goes, how it is produced, where the materials for production come from, or any part of the production process. You could say the workers no longer control the means of production. This handsome lad here, your boy Karl Marx, wrote extensively on the importance of the producers being the ones in control of the means of production. Presently, employers own the warehouses, the factories, the retail outlets, the banana stands, and all of the equipment within these spaces. Employees are instructed to use the space and equipment exactly as the owners and managers expect them to, or be fired. Everything a supermarket worker needs to perform the job is provided for them. An Amazon worker need not add any input to the goings-on of a fulfillment center. They simply must be good little fulfillers and fulfill fulfillments lest they be replaced by robots. This isn't to say that all jobs today are based only on consumption. Production in Western nations, though diminished, isn't completely gone. Here in New Zealand, for example, there is still a sizable agricultural industry that accounts for a large portion of exports, though this industry is far less impressive than what it was in the 50s leading up to the 80s. In the US, the majority of manufacturing jobs have long disappeared over the horizon, but Uncle Sam still produces guns, ammunition, and a wide variety of other neat little weapons of mass destruction and immiseration. Infrastructural roles such as doctors, nurses, teachers, firepeople, and perpetual perpetrators of state violence will always exist. So too will domestic roles like janitors or childcare workers. So yes, other jobs are out there, but they pale in comparison to the economic output generated by the sale of luxury pedicures and stuffed teddy bears made in Taiwan. Shit, sorry, my bad, I mean Southeast Island, China. The paradigm of satisfying and meaningful labor is now over, replaced with mundane yet exhausting jobs that very few of us are proud of, only rewarded with a funnel of money into our pockets so we can consume the products that we no longer produce. This might sound like a pretty good deal. After all, who needs rights and power in society when you can have an endless stream of movie tie-in Lego sets? There's just one tiny, itty-bitty little problem. The treats being dangled in front of us are becoming increasingly expensive, but our wages are not following the same trajectory. Wages have stagnated for large swaths of working people, resulting in a population that can no longer afford to engage in the consumption that makes our lives more bearable, and helps us forget that the labor we spend most of our lives engaging in only serves to generate capital for capitalists. The cost of rent, goods, and services is becoming untenable for countless numbers of people, with full-time workers being unable to make ends meet, which many of us would probably agree is a bad thing. And we wonder why poor mental health is such an increasingly prevalent issue. I've personally been in the all too common position of working a meaningless dead-end job that pays only enough to cover rent, groceries, and an occasional treat. But God forbid if my car ever broke down, and oh, look at that, it did. I couldn't afford to fix it, so I scrapped my beautiful little 1993 Nissan Pulsar and used the pocket change I got for it to buy a secondhand bike. It then became my routine to spend 2 hours pedaling to a 9-hour shift at a job where I spent the entire time on my feet, to then pedal on back home by midnight and wake up to do it all again tomorrow. Now, I didn't have kids to feed. I was in good health. Still kind of am. Here in New Zealand, the minimum wage isn't great, but it's better than many countries, and employees here have relatively decent protections from exploitation. So my situation was a far cry from just how bad life can be for some workers. Now you might be sitting here and thinking, what a whiny little wuss. Why don't you just stop complaining and do your job? Which, hey, fair enough. But it's the constant complaining of whiny little wusses like me, who are never satisfied with poor working conditions, and loudly advocate to effect positive change for everybody. Being a whingy weenie who stands up to the exploitation of workers is hardly a bad thing in my humblest opinion. I think we should all be more angry and more whiny about workplace conditions. The sick irony of this consumption-driven system that we live in is that the jobs which make consumption of goods possible are the least compensated. The baristas, the fellows pushing trolleys back to the front of the supermarket so you don't have to walk too far, the wait staff, the bartenders, the call center operators, the Uber drivers, who as independent contractors have even fewer rights, as well as those in domestic and infrastructural roles, are the people who make our lifestyle possible. They're often expected to put in far more hours than your average worker, or in other cases, aren't given enough hours to cover their expenses, leaving them with too little pay to live or too little free time to enjoy living. For decades, they've had to put up with unnecessarily cruel conditions to only barely make ends meet, with employers continually stripping away rights and creating miserable workplaces designed to maximize profit. The workers who have been lauded as heroes and essential workers over the pandemic are consistently screwed over the most, and the hardest, and in the most uncomfortable positions. The pandemic has made it abundantly clear just how much corporations, large businesses, and even a number of small ones value their employees, and the workers are starting to see through the bullshit and demand better. We've all heard about the apocalyptic labor shortage, which has seen many business owners miss out on profits, have to close up shop, or have to do the worst thing imaginable. The most horrible, terrible thing that no self-respecting business owner should ever have to do. Do the same job as their employees. There's more than enough people out there who need work, or want to work. They just don't want to work for Emperor Bezos, being forced to piss in Gatorade bottles to ensure they deliver a novelty egg slicer in under 2 hours. If people aren't going to be well compensated for their work, they at least want to feel like it has some purpose. For too long, workers have received neither. Many business owners or managers are super upset that employees are starting to get the upper hand, crying out for workers that will continue to accept poverty wages, and be constantly yelled at by a boss that's desperately trying to mask an inferiority complex. Well, they can eat dirt. To be fair to the small business owners, who are good employers and generally try to do the right thing for their workers, who are already reeling from the pandemic, and now the subsequent shift in worker attitudes, it is tough, and it does suck. The thing is, though, no one is obligated to work for anyone. If people don't want to work for Belinda's Boutique Basket Weaving, and this causes the business to go under and be absorbed by Big Basket Inc., that is the unfortunate nature of our current economy. This is why we need to establish a class consciousness that includes small business owners alongside their employees. Because the more we have corporate rule, fewer rights and opportunities will exist for workers and an increasing number of new and even established smaller businesses. The tide is turning for workers in the West. I'll cover workers in the third world later. We need to keep fighting. Keep demanding better pay, better treatment, and especially for a seat at the table when making decisions on what our labor output will be used for. But most importantly, we all need to smash the like button, ring that bell, and hit subscribe.